and something other than small arms fire going back at it. This is a situation where we have no control of the camera, so whatever Abu Dhabi TV puts up in this moment is what we're going to see. But again, fire coming outside the building, from within the building, out to the Americans on the other side, and they are trying to, in the words of the Pentagon, suppress it, stop it, end it.
قصف عنيف ومكثف.
نعم.
We asked General Wes Clark earlier tonight how long he thought this sort of thing, another part of the city, back to the other shot, how long he thought this sort of thing would go on, days, weeks, and he thought more likely days than weeks. But that's a guess.
هناك قوات أمريكية تبعد عنا عدة مئات من الأمتار البسيطة.
A response like that typically inspires a quick halt to small arms fire.
نجزم بيقين تام بذلك، ولكن من المؤكد أن هناك مواجهات عنيفة تدور في محيط وسط العاصمة. يبدو أن هناك عملية إنزال أمريكي للسيطرة على القصر الرئاسي.
Okay.
نعم، كما نتابع
معك الآن.
نعم.
معك الآن الزميل
just underscores the point that however optimistically the headline writers are, and however optimistically we tend, all of us, to report this these days, there is plenty of danger still out there. And it's silly to believe that all of the dangerous moments take place in front of television cameras. They don't. These are just the ones you see.
يبدو أن هناك محاولة تقدم أمريكية لدبابات ومدرعات
through tanks and armored vehicles through one of the bridges in an attempt to control that bridge.
This is CNN now translating the Abu Dhabi correspondent.
There's heavy fire around that bridge where American troops and British troops are trying to control. We will try to, from my location, I can see that this is a building in the presidential complex. The troops next to this building are fighting and exchanging fire with American tanks. We can see directly, we can see bullets being exchanged targeting the bridge from both sides, even areas surrounding and next to this bridge. Looks like there are several fires around the place.
So somewhere out there there are American tanks. They're either one or more.
In several places, there's heavy fighting in some of these buildings where some of Iraqi troops are fighting.
We talked so much last week about urban combat and what it would be like.
We can see that
you can see it now.
Are trying to hit the troops. We will try to direct our camera. This building is at the beginning of the bridge who they are trying to control. On the other bank, where the American troops are.
So this fight surrounds the control of a bridge to get across the river, according to the correspondent for Abu Dhabi TV.
أيمن أنا لا أدري إن كنت تستطيع رؤية الدخان الأسود المنبعث الآن.
I don't know. Can you see the black smoke?
Lebanese
Yes, I can
television,
see.
Lebanese broadcasting on the left side
Black smoke
may or may not be the same thing from a different angle.
in the surrounding areas of this palace. There are some snipers around this area.
هناك أكثر من قناص.
There are many snipers in many locations. This black smoke. There were a group of snipers who were exchanging fire with the British and American forces since early morning. And as you saw earlier, even our offices were not safe from this bombing.
We would be surprised if in fact there were British soldiers there. It's possible.
Who preceded this fight were kind of an introduction or a beginning to facilitate for the American troops to come later in the infantry, American infantry, to follow.
Again, this is a CNN translator translating Abu Dhabi television.
They're advancing through southeast of Baghdad for American troops.
يعني هذا المحيط الذي نتحدث عنه أيمن منذ الصباح
This
الباكر.
area that we're talking about since early morning, the presidential complex,
نعم ويبدو أن ما حوله تقريبا
we
قد
think that what the surrounding area
تدمير الكامل.
is nearly completely
يعني هو
destroyed.
تم استهداف هذا المحيط كما ذكرت لك
This
من البارحة.
area has been targeted since yesterday.
كان فندق الرشيد مسرحا
Yesterday,
لمحاولة توغل
Rashid
الأمريكية.
Hotel, they attempted to
اليوم منذ الصباح
enter.
يبدو أن المحاولة
We were there.
تمت
Today, early
مرة
morning,
أخرى من جديد
they
الصباح.
attempted again to enter the area.
يبدو حتى الآن من خلال ما نشاهد
It seems
يعني على الأقل أن هذا المحيط مستهدف
that this area is
لا ندري حتى
having priority and is
هذا المكان من قبل
targeted
القوات البريطانية والأمريكية أم أن القوات
from the
العربية
British and
نجحت
American
في
troops,
صد
but the
هذه المحاولة وإرغامهم
Iraqis
على
have
التراجع على العموم. الآن ليس
repelled
هناك
the
مطاردات
attack and
وكل ما نشاهد
in
الآن
general.
هو فقط
and the
الدخان
troops were not
المتصاعد
able to
من جراء القصف الذي استهدفه
have control
هذه
over this
البناية
area.
وتلك. من كان يتمركز فيها
As far as nobody knows who were in these buildings,
سنحاول فيما بعد أن هدأت الأمور قليلا.
but later, once things are calmer, we will try to find out.
When things are calmer. Just imagine for a moment,
Sporadic.
this is a picture that is literally being seen across much of the world right now. It is one of those moments where news channels around the world, everybody is watching, many people are watching exactly the same thing.
We don't know if it's an Iraqi tank or an American tank. We also are hearing artillery from a tank.
نعم. أصوات متابعة معك جابر. نعم أسمعها.
You can hear
أنا
the
أترك لحظة
sounds.
صمتك أسمع معك.
يعني أعتقد أن الأصوات
Much more dense smoke right now in the center of your screen. It was not there just moments
And our
ago.
viewers can see for themselves the smoke and fire,
يعني باتت موجودة في أكثر من مكان.
which now in several places.
كانت الأصوات لدبابة لم نتبين حتى
And earlier it was a sound of
أمريكية بريطانية
a tank. We don't know whether it's British, American, or
هذا
Iraqi.
المحيط لا يزال يبدو
But
أن
this
يعني لم تتم
area
السيطرة عليه لا من قبل
is
القوات
still
الأمريكية البريطانية ولا حتى من قبل القوات العراقية. يبدو أنهم
not under control, it seems, of any party, not
المحيط.
American, not British, not Iraqi. They're still fighting over this area for control.
ونحاول أن ننوه أنه مكان
We're trying to
يطلق
tell you
عليه
that
إلى
this
حد
area
المحيط الرئاسي
is
ولهذا السبب
a presidential complex area, and that is why it's being targeted.
في الساعات الأولى من هذا
Some
الصباح
news earlier this morning
لسان أحد المسؤولين ونود أن
said,
نستوضح هذه
mentioned that
الأمور منك جابر. يقال أن أحد المباني
that one of the buildings was
Again,
bombed.
this is, as you look at, there's a lot on the screen, and as you look at the bottom third of the screen where it says Abu Dhabi TV says the Iraqis have repelled the attack, that is the view of the correspondent for Abu Dhabi TV on the scene. This is an area, one of the many presidential compounds that exist in the country or existed in the country. There is a bridge, I'm not sure it's that bridge that you see to the right. There was fire coming from this building, coming out towards the Americans. The Americans fired back, and you can see fire now burning in that building now.
10 minutes to go there. I cannot confirm what was said. It is a bit too far from our camera.
These would certainly be
I
U.S.
wasn't there, I
tanks,
didn't see or I didn't hear anything.
not
to
British
confirm.
tanks in the area, almost certainly.
What you see is fire in this building in the presidential complex. As I mentioned earlier, you broadcasted the images which we took of the office, which was targeted by heavy bombing. A missile hit the building, and we'll have the images talk for themselves and speak for themselves.
You could see fire in at least 2 floors of that building, with a pretty good fire burning on the top floor of the building. In this exchange of gunfire that came either from the building or from the area of the building at American tanks some distance away. And in the view of the correspondent for Abu Dhabi TV, and it's only that, the Iraqis have successfully defended this position that they were trying to defend. Which may or may not be true. But that's the view that the correspondent has of this moment. And that fire does seem to be getting bigger, doesn't it, on the top floor of the building. There was, back 5 minutes or so ago, maybe a little longer now, large bursts of tank fire at that building, particularly on the left side of that building as you look at the screen.
يبدو أن في لحظة سكوننا كي نترك الصورة تعبر.
We're having these images speak for themselves.
أصوات تبادل الطلقات أو الرشاشات إلى
We still hear
حد ما
exchange of fire.
الغريب اليوم أيمن أن الطائرات يعني الأمريكية والبريطانية كانت تحلق على ارتفاعات جدا منخفضة.
British and American were flying on a very low altitude.
وبث صورها ولكن يعني كانت تطير على ارتفاعات جدا منخفضة.
They were flying very low.
أن حتى المضادات النيرانية أو المضادات
even
الأرضية النيران المضادات
anti-craft,
التي اشتهرت بها بغداد طوال سنين 12 لم تكن
anti-aircraft were not
بالفعل
ready and was not
على
used.
علو جد منخفض تمكنت من إصابة أهداف عنده وإن
They
كان يعني معظم هذه الأهداف
managed to hit their targets.
مكانها أو
You may recall an hour or perhaps an hour and a half ago seeing those A-10s circling low over Baghdad, and the description is that the Abu Dhabi correspondent is providing is not inconsistent with what might have been a mission of that A-10 about an hour ago.
Were used earlier extensively. Now, since we are in the 20th day, maybe this is as a result of weakness that they were used earlier. This building that we're watching on the screen was the planning department of planning.
Excuse me, it is the planning ministry of the Iraqi government, and that fire now burning very intensely on the top floor.
Yesterday we were there.
And burning as well on the floor 3 stories down.
Any American or British forces there. It seems there was a second attempt today, and we don't know if they succeeded or not, but an attempt were made to enter the complex, and we will know if they managed to enter the complex or not. The Americans are saying that the place you visited yesterday was the same place where the
Jane Araf is on the phone. Jane, who's been reporting from northern Iraq, has been for a long time our bureau chief in Baghdad. And Jane, you're looking at these pictures and you know this building well.
It appears to be the Prime Ministry, which used to have the office of Tariq Aziz on the banks of the Tigris. Now, earlier we were seeing Al Jazeera, the offices of the Arab satellite news channel, that had been hit, and that actually is very close to the Information Ministry. In fact, it's almost across the street, just down the river, on the banks of the Tigris River. And interestingly, that office and other offices, part of a complex of journalists' offices on the riverbank, are owned by the Journalists Union, which is headed by Saddam Hussein's eldest son, Uday. Now, we had seen those pictures of the Al Jazeera office being hit, whether it was an accident or whether it was deliberate. Obviously, many people in Baghdad will believe it was a deliberate hit on the offices of a network that has not been in favor with the U.S., to say the least. Now, they had put their offices quite close to the Information Ministry deliberately during the last few years. Any journalists there, including the Arab channels, have to work in very close cooperation with the Information Ministry.
And just again about, I'm guessing here, but I would say 45 minutes or so ago, we saw an employee of Al Jazeera apparently was wounded in some sort of action, and they were taking him out or her out, assume him for a second, to get assistance.
That appeared to have been as a result of that hit on the Al Jazeera building. Now, that's a 3-story building right on the banks of the Tigris. The vantage point is wonderful. You can look out over the Tigris and across the city, which is how they were able to get those quite incredible shots that they got at the beginning of this war. But it's also obviously quite a sensitive location, having an office that close to the Information Ministry. And the Information Ministry had always thought to be a target. Now, again, that is a complex of buildings that are had been used by Abu Dhabi TV, is used by Al Jazeera and other Arab news channels because of their proximity to the Information Ministry. They are all owned by the Journalists Union, which, again, is headed by Saddam Hussein's eldest son.
So viewers, keep them abreast of this. These are live pictures from Abu Dhabi TV. You see the 2 U.S. tanks on that bridge. And Jane Araf has been describing the area around the bridge and also the area of an earlier incident where an Al Jazeera building was hit and an Al Jazeera employee was wounded. Whether these... Go ahead, Jane.
was just going to say that the thing about these targets that are being hit in all the buildings is that, as you know, very often there are military sites and other sites interspersed in residential areas. The area in Mansour, which in fact we used to live in Baghdad, where they were targeting a restaurant that was believed to be affiliated with the regime, is actually on a main street in a main residential area. Now, it would be impossible not to hit civilian casualties in places like that because it is a very dense city, as you know, and it's really packed with people. It's a huge city. They're very close together, and it was, up until now, a thriving, busy city, and places like that restaurant are just jam-packed next to houses, next to shops. Everything is intermingled.
Securing the bridge for other troops.
Jane, it must seem quite strange to you just to watch, as you saw the tank fire there, to watch this all play out in a city you lived in for a long time.
It is absolutely extraordinary to see the smoke, the tanks, the image of U.S. soldiers in a city that for so long has been so closed and under such an iron grip is absolutely extraordinary. And this is from the perspective of watching it from the outside. For those inside who are actually seeing U.S. soldiers in the street, if they dare to venture outside their homes, it must be absolutely surreal. Now, this is something that a lot of Iraqis had indeed longed for and feared at the same time, and I imagine it's still the case now, that they're watching this play out with a mixture of terror and anticipation, because it really does appear to be unclear. It would be entirely unclear on the ground if you were in your home in Baghdad at this moment what exactly is going to happen.
What is going to happen in the next moment, or how this will all end?
How it will all end, I believe, in conversations with the people that I did live in the city and worked there for some years, they believed that ultimately, if the U.S. were serious, it could come in and change that leadership. What they weren't so confident about was how long, how painful, and how bloody that process might be, and that will still be a fear. People there were incredibly afraid that this could unleash something, that you could never get back into that box, that there would be sectarian violence. And it was very interesting that all of the fears that came out just before this war started, particularly of middle-class Iraqis, middle-class Baghdadis, who consistently expressed the fear that all the people on the outskirts of the city who had been oppressed for so many years, and we're talking about neighborhoods of Shias who had moved there in waves, Shia Muslims, moved in waves from the south originally to find work in the city. They're now spread around the city in huge communities that had been self-contained. Saddam City, for instance, which had up to 1 million Shias in it, was always thought to be so potentially subversive that it was almost always under virtual military control. There are a lot of fears in the center of Baghdad that if things are unleashed, that if there is a period where there is a power vacuum in Baghdad, that the walls could break open, if you will, that all of these people come flooding into the city seeking revenge for the years of oppression, seeking revenge for being poor for all of these years. I mean, that's not the view of everyone, but it was a significant fear on the part of a lot of the population in Baghdad. And right now, with the electricity cut off, with not much contact, and apparently people are being prevented from going from their homes. Apparently you need to get a pass to leave your home. This is to prevent a flood of people leaving. So it is very difficult to go outside the house, which would absolutely add to the terror of not knowing what was going on down the block or down the street.
Just about 2.5 hours ago, well, a little longer than that, your friend and colleague, Nick Robertson, reported that the rumor mill in Baghdad, from just talking to his sources, that the rumor mill in Baghdad was working overtime, and that one of the rumors that it was making the rounds is that there was going to be an uprising of some sort and some size in these Shia neighborhoods, which would in some respects might be helpful to the Americans, and in other respects would be terribly complicating depending on whether it was organized or just anarchy.
And it's always been sort of the boogeyman. It's the threat of violence from the Shias. And It's really unclear to anyone how much of that is real and how much is imagined. Now, certainly they have legitimate grievances, and we did see during all the years we were in Baghdad, uprisings very quickly put down in places like Saddam City, that Shia neighborhood on the edge of Baghdad. Now, it's basically, we can't put it too politely, it's a slum. People live in horrible conditions. They're crammed together. It's probably one of the poorest parts of Baghdad, and it is a place that is just, with the right spark, could be waiting to explode. Now, that is always a possibility and has always been a possibility, even before this war started. For instance, when Shia clerics were being killed under mysterious circumstances, essentially assassinated, there had been some riots in Saddam City that were very quickly suppressed, with people being killed and the riots put down. It was, as you know, Aaron, a very effective regime, very effectively in control. So the question has always been, what happens when you lift that control? And the feeling is that U.S. troops coming in are not going to replace those decades of iron control by Iraqi troops, and that extremely effective interlocked system of Iraqi secret police, the web of informers, the Republican Guard, the Ba'ath Party. That's the reason he survived so long, that it was extremely effective. Now, people do fear and have feared for some time that it could result in Shia violence against Sunnis, but at the end of the day, it really depends on what else is happening on the ground, whether there's a power vacuum or whether the American troops and their allies can go in and stabilize things. And right now, the feeling is that it could really very much go either way. Aaron?
Jane, just stay with us here for as long as you can. That's Jane Arraf, who for a long time was the CNN bureau chief in Baghdad, and she has been covering the war from northern Iraq. Reem Brahimi was part of the CNN crew that was, not so politely, asked to leave Baghdad now a couple of weeks ago. She is in Amman, and she has been watching this from Amman, and she joins us on the phone. Reem?
Yes, Aaron. Well, you can see those tanks on the bridge heading clearly from the west side of the river, which is where most of the government buildings are, to the eastern side of that river, clearly trying to make its way to gather a little more ground, as it were, in Baghdad. Now, we saw earlier on pictures of the Ministry of Planning on fire. It used to be the offices of the Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz and Vice President Taha Yassin Ramadan. This new picture again showing a bridge. I understand the Al Jazeera building may have been hit. It's a house that hosts a lot of Arab media, but mainly, of course, at Al Jazeera. It's in fact a production company that owns the house and let's say hosts the Al Jazeera reporters and crew there. Apparently, one journalist was seriously injured and another one just slightly injured, and we're hoping to bring you more details on that, Aaron, as soon as we get them. Aaron?
Okay, Reem, just stay with us here. It certainly did look like fire came against the cement or brick of that building, and there's also obviously an American plane in the sky.
نعم، قد اطمأنا منذ دقائق أن الجميع نزل على الأرض، لم يعد أحد على السطح.
Different angle coming again across the river. There are two American tanks. You can see them on the river. And there was a very large explosion just a moment ago. Reem, you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm watching. There's a huge explosion on that other side of the bridge, near that building.
And these buildings, these low-rise buildings, do you recognize them? Do you know what they are?
Seen from this angle, I would need to have the, if I could have the camera pulled out, it would be nice, but okay. I would need to have a bigger view. It looks like from that direction, there has to be something that links them to those government buildings. The one we saw earlier on, Aaron, the Ministry of Planning, is an interesting building because it was hit in the first 3 days of the bombing, and it was totally on fire. In fact, you could see that fire rage all day.